Gotta remember to turn the music down today. Ready? Good morning, everyone. Welcome to my studio. My name is Michael Markowsky, and once again, we are going to attempt to recreate another one of my favorite paintings by another one of my favorite great masters of art. We're going to be looking at Franz Marc's The White Cat from 1912, a pivotal painting right near the very end of his career before he tragically died in World War I. I'm so excited to do this painting and to try to do this one a little bit more quickly, perhaps. So let's get into the plan. There's the title for today's painting. Let's look at the plan of attack here. So in just a couple seconds, we're going to talk about how difficult today's painting is. Then we're going to look at some materials that you could use to recreate what I'm going to be doing here in class. We're going to do an image transfer, so while you could sketch it out, you can use my free template. You don't even have to give me your email address. Everything's 100% free here for people all over the world to learn how to paint. You can use the image, and we're going to do a transfer. I'll show you how to do that momentarily. Then we're going to prime it with some color. That's the Imprimatura. Then we're gonna talk briefly about Franz Marc's biography. I did do a previous episode where I talked about him, so not much new that I think I can add to that, but maybe we'll just look at the painting specifically and just talk a little bit more about the painting itself, the White Cat, today. And then we're going to jump right into it, bouncing background and foreground, bouncing back and forth between background and foreground. And then we're going to wrap up in, well, I kind of got to be done within 3 hours, so it'll definitely be a shorter episode than that. Okay. Just a quick little bit of housekeeping, though, before we go on. Is just if you want to support the channel with a small donation, you can consider doing that, as well as like, subscribe, and hitting the notification bell. You can scan the QR code to send $5 via PayPal, or you could enter in that web address above there, the paypal.me/markowskyart. That's what it looks like when you hit the link. You can also send an e-transfer or a check in the mail, or use the YouTube Super Chat while we're here live. If you want my email address, it's on the Facebook group and my website. Those links are below. I don't post them here because I get bombarded with spam every day. Dozens and dozens of crazy spam emails because of this channel. So anything to slow down that the spammers is what I'm after. So also, quick mention to join the Facebook group. I think it's next week we're doing our next bonus feedback episode. So anything that's on the Facebook group, whether it's The White Cat by Franz Marc, your version of it today, or it's something we did a few years ago, or even the drawing course that I did 5 years ago, which has millions of views, I still give people free feedback on that too. So that's what the Facebook group looks like. I encourage you to join that and join the wonderful supportive community, many of whom are watching right now. So let's jump into it. There's Trap, there's Senga, Mona in the studio. Hi from India. Hi, Mona. Nice to see you in the chat there. Okay, so let's talk about how difficult today's painting is using our patented scale of difficulty. So here's the stratifications of complexity with these paintings. So you've got your beginner, never seen me before, never painted before. Could today's painting be the kind of painting you could do relatively successfully? Relative. That's my max headroom. Next is novice, somebody who's maybe been painting for a little while, done some of the very basic painting studies with me, the color wheel, learning about value and color temperature. Maybe done 1 or 2 paintings as well. And then you got your intermediate, somebody who could have painted for a few years or a decade or more. Intermediate is quite a broad range there. Then once you start to make your own paintings, and maybe you're even selling some of your own paintings, that's your advanced artist. And then if you're on the wall next to Franz Marc in one of the various museums that his work has appeared around the world, then you could call yourself an expert. So I'm going to say, actually, our painting today, while I think anybody could attempt it at all those different scales, I'm going to try to keep today's painting to the beginner level, and so to keep it as simple as possible. That might mean I'm going to cut a few corners so it's not exactly like the original, which is sometimes what I tend to do. But I want to see if I can make this painting for someone who's literally first time they've ever held a paintbrush kind of thing. Okay, so having determined our scale of difficulty, let's move on to the materials required. What materials would you need to paint today's painting? Now, I've done an entire 1.5 hour long episode where I go into great depth about everything I'm going to cover here in about 2 or 3 minutes. You can scan the QR code or go to that web address. From there, you'll be able to download the PDF that has all of the information I'm just about to throw at you right now. And so you can print it out, you can have it on your phone while you're standing, look at an art supplies in the art supply store. But essentially, we're going to be using acrylic paint. This is an acrylic paint class, and we're going to be painting on a 9x12 canvas board or canvas panel. And you can buy these at your local dollar store for $1. You can also, there's a link below where you can order some various different brands that are about $2 a panel, and I think they are much better. Anyway, I take them, they usually come wrapped in plastic. I take it out of the plastic, and then I apply some clear, or sorry, so white acrylic gesso. Okay, good. I was like, did I actually prepare this surface? So I take it out, and then I apply some white acrylic gesso, let it dry overnight, and then I sand it down again. It just gets a slightly smoother surface. Now, you don't need to do that. You can just take it right out of the plastic and start painting. But if you want just a slightly smoother surface, consider just a gentle bit of sanding, maybe another layer of gesso to get started. Also, I put this really in here for myself, is to grab a rag or two so that those things are nearby. So the more rags you have within arm's reach, the less likely you're going to have a disaster. That's the way that the universe works. The further away your rags are, the bigger the disaster. I've noticed. Okay, so what we're going to be using is called the split primary palette. That means we're going to use 2 yellows, 2 reds, 2 blues, as opposed to 1 of each. The reason why we're doing that is we're splitting them into their warm and cool components. Every color has a temperature, so understanding color temperature is really important when making a painting because it helps you to create the illusion of depth. Even if you're making an abstract painting, you can use color temperature because warm colors appear to advance towards the viewer, whereas cool colors appear to recede into the background. So all you got to ask yourself when you're making a painting from life or from a photograph is, where is what it is I'm trying to paint right now? Is it a mountain way off in the distance? Probably some cool colors. Is it a flower in the foreground? Probably some warm colors, right? Warm colors in the foreground, cool colors in the background. Okay, and so I'm just going to flash through all of these different brands of paint. I'm about to use here in a few moments this Amsterdam Azo Yellow Deep as my warm color for the Imprimatura. And I'm not sponsored, not paid, not given a drip of free supplies by anybody. I'm entirely supported by people like yourself. That's why I do that little shout out for donations, because that's the only thing keeping me afloat after 500 years of doing 500 years. Feels like it, 5 years of doing these episodes. It's still morning. Haven't had my tea yet, so... Okay, now we're ready to go. Okay, so I'm just going to flash all these different brands of paint on screen. You can certainly buy better quality paint, but you're going to pay about 3 times the price for half as much paint. That's why I like this brand. I think it's really good, especially if you're a beginner to intermediate artist. In fact, I'm using this particular paint to paint my graphic novel, which I've been working on for years now. But because I'm painting so many pages, 180 pages hand-painted, anything I can do to save a little bit of money, and especially when it's being reproduced and printed, I certainly have no problem using this brand of paint. If I was selling my paintings for $1 million a pop, yeah, maybe I'll put a little bit of money into getting better paint. But most people do not need really expensive paint or canvas or brushes to make any painting. Now, I've just put up here, there's 4 brands of paint that at least I've been able to identify thus far, which I do not recommend, and that's because these 4 brands use way too much white as a filler in the paint, and that makes it basically impossible to mix really vibrant, bright, saturated colors because they're always going to be a little bit pastel. It also makes it impossible to mix our own black, and I love to make my own black, and I'm going to do that in today's episode as well, just so people who are maybe new to painting might be able to see how that process works, but of course you can always use your own black. I should also say that most brands of paint, including Amsterdam, put a little bit of titanium white into the paint as a filler. But Peebo, for instance, which is one of the biggest, they're like the McDonald's of acrylic paint, put a lot of white in there, which is really disappointing as such a massive brand to cheapen out like that. And you can see this if you look at the back of your paint, you'll be able to see... She doesn't list it here, but if we go to their website, it'll list the component pigments. Yeah, this is all in Dutch because Amsterdam paint, surprise, surprise, is from the Netherlands. It would be funny if it was Amsterdam paint from good old made in Texas, Amsterdam paint. Okay, well, let's get going. There's Singa in the chat. This was a definitely last-second episode. I was like, I got 3 hours right now. I want to do it. Let's do it. So it's not surprising that not everybody knows this is happening right now. Okay, so our first step is to do the image transfer. So you could take my free drawing course here on YouTube, which has millions of people have literally done that course. Most popular thing I've ever done in my life and probably ever will. And so if you want to learn how to draw, you can take that course. But if you just want to start painting, then you could use the image transfer method I'm about to show you. So to find this image, you can go to the free Dropbox folder, download today's template. Let's show you where that is. There's a little shout out to our Facebook group. Dropbox. Okay, so if you click that link, it's going to look just like this. You'll see that the very basic, there's the art supply guide right at the top, and then to get started with painting, I strongly encourage you to paint the color wheel. But if you want to jump to today's painting, get started right away, you can't wait, then you can scroll right down here to Franz Marc Beginner. You'll see that there's lots of famous names. There's Picasso, Leonardo da Vinci, Frida Kahlo, all the great masters are here. They're organized by first name, last name. And then here's inside this folder, you'll see Franz Marc. There's the painting itself, and then 2 versions of the outline. One's a JPEG, one's a PDF, whatever's easier for you to print at home there. Okay, so I've got my outline and I've got my canvas. I'm going to take a little bit of tape I think I'm just going to put this basically right in the middle. Maybe I'm going to lower it down a little bit just so I make sure that the top of his back's not, you know, I kind of want, ideally, roughly equal space all around here. I mean, that's certainly not exactly what Franz Marc did, but that's his painting. I have an opportunity to do anything I want with my version of this painting, including if you've got a cat at home and you want to paint this painting and replace the white cat with your brown and purple spotted cat, then I would strongly encourage you to do that. I think that would be really cool. Add the specific qualities of your cat into this image. Okay, so what I've just done is put some carbon paper underneath here, and you can see when I trace the lines that those lines now appear on my canvas. So just double check after you do a couple quick lines like this, and double check that you do have the carbon paper, graphite paper, charcoal paper, whatever kind of paper it might be, that you've got it right side down, because it's sometimes some of them look the same on both sides, and you don't want to spend 5-10 minutes doing this process only to realize, the carbon paper was upside down. And anyone who's done this process has probably done that at least once. Those of you watching right now, you could put in the comment, how many times have you got the carbon paper backwards, upside down, and not even realized until it was all traced out that you in fact had it upside down? So anyone who's done this a few times, I'm sure, has made that mistake. So if this is your first time doing it and you made a mistake, hey, welcome to the club. I've done it a bunch of times. I've done it here on camera several times. So there's nobody's perfect. Nor would I want to live in a world where anyone or someone is perfect. Imagine being in a world where there's like 1 or 2 people who actually are perfect. How like nauseating and stressful that would be. I think part of being a human is being imperfect. And part of making art is expressing your own imperfection. And because even though we've done great art by so many great artists, I never once believed a single one of them was perfect. None of those artists were perfect. None of the artworks they created were ever perfect. So people go, what about the Mona Lisa? Surely we can agree the Mona Lisa's perfect, Michael. To which I would say, well, maybe you should ask Leonardo da Vinci about the Mona Lisa, because he certainly didn't think that painting was perfect. Right? Why is the Mona Lisa in Paris and not Rome or Milan? Because he started working on that painting in Italy, and he was commissioned by someone who wanted Leonardo to paint his wife or mistress or new bride. We're not exactly sure exactly. It's been about 500 years, the details a little murky at this point. But for whatever reason, Leonardo never gave that painting to the person who commissioned him and took receipt, or that person never took receipt of the painting or paid him for it or whatever. So Leonardo continued to work on that for maybe a decade or more, even when he moved to France at the very end of his life to be the official court painter for the king of France. So, you know, we could say that you could say, well, the painting's perfect, but Leonardo didn't think it was perfect, right? Because a lot of artists have negative feelings about their own artwork. But that just goes to show that, you know, well, at least Leonardo didn't agree that it was perfect. Okay. I have these labels that I usually put around the edge of my palette here, but I was cleaning them, and you could see I cleaned them so well that I rubbed the text off. So I've got new labels, which if I wasn't doing an episode today, this is what one of those little things behind the scenes that I'd be doing right now. So I'm not going to do that. Well, you'll have to trust me that I'm putting the paint in the right place here. Okay, so what should we get up to next? Just checking my audio levels, because last episode I did on Friday or Saturday, I had the music up at full blast. Nobody said anything. I mean, it is good music. My best friend Sam Davidson wrote and recorded, performed that music that you're hearing in the background. So I love it. But if you're trying to hear me talk, it's a little bit a little difficult. Pascaline says, I like this artist. We did a horse in the past. Yes, we did. This is a painting we did on March 8th, 2022. It's funny, when I was getting ready for today's episode, I was like, oh, yeah, I'll just, you know, some of my research is in this folder, the Franz Marc folder. I'm like, that was last year, right? Like, no, oh, it wasn't 2024. Well, it's 2023 we did that. No, not 20. Well, it was near the end of 2022, certainly. It's like, wow, we did this one over 3 years ago? My goodness, time just flies by. Anyway, we did this episode, and you can see here's the very end of the episode. That's how that painting turned out. So if you're sitting there skeptically, I don't know if this will be worth my time. Well, I don't know. You judge for yourself whether you think this one is turned out. I don't know if you think I have no anything about what I'm talking about. It could also be that I was just tremendously lucky and it turned out okay. Kathy says, I just saw this. A surprise. I like this painting. I am off doing faces for a while. This looks like my style. Sadly, I have a Zoom meeting in 30 minutes. Are you painting today, Senga? Katie says, I put it upside down at least 50% of the time. That's a really smart way of making a painting. I think what you're talking about, if I understand, it's really take your painting and paint it upside down, and take the image, flip that upside down. You know, rotating the painting and working on it upside down, if you've got the source image nearby and you're also rotating it, is a very effective way to ensure that, especially if you're drawing faces, that they look right. Because if you're looking at it straight, you're like, there's something awkward about this painting. What is going wrong? That if you just turn it upside down and you look at it, you're like, I didn't even realize I forgot to paint one of the eyes. How did I miss that? Sometimes just because you turn it around, it's like you're seeing it anew for the first time, and so it kind of short circuits those kind of judgmental biases that you might have when you're looking at your painting, so you can see it like fresh, right? Great point, Katie. Shiva says, I've got 3 cats at home. So how do you make a painting, Shiva, when you've got 3 cats in your studio? Do you have to keep the door closed, or do you get the catnip out so you keep them busy? Put them on the scratching post, paint, so they don't, because cats like to get into everybody's business. Oh, Katie says, sorry, I'm not that smart. I meant to put the tracing paper upside down. Oh, I see what you're saying. Hey, I think you're probably pretty smart if you're watching today's episode. You know what I'm talking about? Well, either way, maybe you just learned a little something. But yes, putting the carbon paper upside down is a very typical mistake that we all make. We're all human after all, right? Okay, let's talk more paint, Michael. Let's get into this. Now that we've got our painting on the canvas, let's put a little bit of color into it. Now, you do not need to do this step at all. I love doing this step, and it's sort of become, it's kind of my trademark. It's kind of part of my creative routine whenever I'm making a painting. But there's lots of reasons why someone would want to do an Imprimatura. Imprimatura is an Italian word. It's been around for 600 plus years, and artists have been using this technique since the early pre-Renaissance period, and was really popularized by artists, really specifically Leonardo da Vinci, among others. And it was sort of the, painting 101 as far as the academic tradition of art. Now, today's artist, Franz Marc, was definitely challenging the academy and the academic kind of process and techniques, but I still think that at least being aware that this is a technique available to you might be of interest, especially if you're a beginner artist. I think it also really helps elevate beginner paintings from just sort of looking, well, that looks like your first painting, to like, whoa, what's going on? This painting looks more complicated than I thought you were capable of doing. Who have you been taking art classes with? Okay, so let's just double check and just see what Franz Marc may or may not have done in this painting. So I'm just looking at the original, and I'm just trying to see if I do see any color underneath the color or between the brush strokes. So I'm sort of looking in between the shapes, trying to see color. And it's like these little clues to me. That little bit of yellow there suggests that at least, the very least, there was yellow underneath this red. Same thing if I look at the top left here. This purple, I see some yellow that looks like it was underneath that purple. So that's, is highly suggestive that Franz Marc used an Imprimatura, and potentially even the same yellow I'm about to use. It's also possible he didn't do this exact technique because a lot of artists around the period of time where Franz Marc painted this painting in the early 1900s, the pre-war period, this is at the height of avant-garde painting, and it was really about challenging all of the preconceived notions of how a painting should look, how it should be done, what should be painted, etc. So, having said that, a lot of artists are like, well, yeah, I want to overturn all of the rules and challenge the status quo. But, there are some things that those old white guys kind of got right the first time. Maybe we'll don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Okay, so here what I've got is my warm yellow. I've put some warm yellow in just this little old paint lid here, but you could use a salsa lid or a jam lid or a kombucha, I don't know. Any kind of lid, cup, or plate will work. I actually have a palette, but it fell down behind the little gap between the table and the wall, and I don't know if I'll be able to get to it until the next time I move studios. So it's my spirit palette that's hiding behind against the wall down there. There's a bunch of little elves who are like, "Ooh, we have a palette. We will complete our elf masterpiece in the shadows." Okay, so I'm stirring up this. Now, with an Imprimatura, you could literally use any color you want. You'd probably want it to be not too dark, otherwise you're basically like painting, like on black velvet or something. It's very hard to see. And also it's going to make it hard to see your pencil lines. So that could make, having done the image transfer process, it could negate that whole step if it's too dark. I mean, traditionally artists would use like a brick red, a brown reddish color as an Imprimatura. Leonardo da Vinci liked kind of a yellowish brown, not too far off from what I'm using right here. So his was sort of just like kind of a deeper brownish yellow. I like this yellow like this because it just gives the painting a nice little warm glow. It's like the golden hour right before sunset. Everything just kind of goes bright yellowy, golden. But you could just paint right onto the white canvas. There will be a difference, but if this is your first painting, you're like, I don't care. Don't let me stop you from doing whatever it is your heart desires, however the inspiration hits you. Problem of having a camera up above your head is hard to see. I got a little mirror up there, but of course everything's backwards in the mirror, so it takes a little bit of special abilities. There should be an Olympic sport that involves doing everyday menial tasks while looking in a mirror. Something that most people probably, I guess anybody who puts makeup on regularly is like, I got this, no worries. But for the rest of us, it's like, it's something that probably YouTubers probably are really good at doing, because we're always looking at mirrors and video feeds, and everything's sort of backwards, but sometimes not backwards if you're looking at a video feed. Anyway. A little bit inside baseball there. Okay, I'm going to quickly blow dry this, and then we're going to move on. I guess for those of you who might be brand new to the show, you can see that I'm just using a regular hair dryer. I put it at maximum heat, just blow dry the surface. It's going to make all that water evaporate really quickly, and it's bone dry. And using a hair dryer is great when you're painting with acrylic. Speeds up that drying time. You don't have to wait for hours for it to dry. You can just keep working, whereas if you're painting with oil paints, you sometimes do have to let it sit for a week or more before putting another layer of paint on there. Wow, look at all the comments in the chat. Oh, there's Heidi. What a lovely cat. Yes, we did Franz Marc's horse before. Some people also painted the cow, but I painted the fox. Fox is coming down the pipeline pretty soon too, so you're way ahead of me, Heidi. That's awesome. Kathy says, something to look up, the fox and cow. I really miss my painting, but I have a super busy summer so far. Yes, summer. Summer's so busy. Last week I mentioned how now that our daughter is, well, almost 6, but just finished kindergarten, going into grade 1 in September, all of a sudden she's home a lot more. She used to be in like daycare before she started school, and so all of a sudden you've got this little ball of wonderful frantic energy. Doesn't like being cooped up in a house on a hot summer day. Wants to get outside and go on adventures. So after this today, we'll probably go to the beach again. She loves the beach. I love the beach, but I don't usually give myself the permission to go to the beach when I'm not with my daughter. So being around her is like, oh, I can go to the beach every day. I'm not lazy. I'm hanging out with my kids. So, okay, let's. What's the next step here? So, I'm just gonna. Just keep track of time here. Let's charge this thing. Okay. Just got to try to be mindful of the time here so I don't go way too long, which I normally do. So let's take a moment here to just briefly look at Franz Marc's biography. I did a previous episode where we painted Franz Marc's blue horse, and I did I talked about the biography of this great artist, so I don't know how much new information I could possibly squeeze in here. Okay, so Franz Marc is born in 1880 and passes away in 1916 at the age of 36 years old. We'll get into his tragic passing here at the very end. But the long story, Franz Marc was born in Munich, Germany. His father was also an artist, an art teacher, and taught him how to paint. So he was a professional landscape painter. He was also, from a young age, really interested in theology, spirituality, religion, and that plays a huge role in his career later on, right? His mother was a Calvinist, so, and also at this particular time in Europe, there's a lot of kind of social upheaval. There's lots of different kind of competing religions, and also kind of a growing middle class. that is kind of maybe questioning the authority of the state and religious authority as well, too. Eventually he goes to school at the Academy of Fine Art in Munich, although he ends up dropping out, moving to Paris, because that's where everything was happening in the early 1900s. And that when he was in Paris at the turn of the century, that's where he meets, all of the big names, Picasso, Matisse, and sees lots of great avant-garde art that's happening at that period of time. It's also around this time where he comes back to Germany in the 1908, 1910. He's back in Munich, and there's quite a vibrant avant-garde art scene in Munich. And we've talked recently about some of the people that were in that scene, including Wassily Kandinsky and Gabriele Munter, who this kind of famous avant-garde art couple, and they were really good friends with Franz Marc and his wife, as well as a number of other artists that we might look at in some future episodes. Together, this group of young artists, they go on to form a couple of groups, but the NKV group, I'm not sure if it's mentioned in here, but they eventually formed the Blue Rider group. This is named after one of Wassily Kandinsky's paintings, the Blue Rider. And really, it's all about the trying to find kind of the spiritual connections between color, or trying to make connections between colors and different. Well, it's about ascribing spiritual meanings to different colors. So, for instance, according to Franz Marc and his fellow Blue Riders, colors like blue represent masculinity and spirituality. Yellow represents femininity and joy. Red represents heightened emotional feelings, often relating to conflict or violence or heartbreak. And then you have white being kind of this neutral, heightened, kind of elevated space. So we'll talk about why all of those associations are quite meaningful for this particular painting, which at first glance just seems like, oh, it's just some arbitrary colors. Not that should stop you from painting your own painting in arbitrary colors, but understanding the meaning that those colors had for Franz Marc, I think, is really important. What's really tragic about the life of Franz Marc is how short it was. Really, in 1910, they formed the Blue Rider group, and they're making a lot of work very quickly. It's like a fever dream. Just you have like 6 or so artists who are really well aligned on what their goals are, on technical approaches to painting, and these ideas about particular kind of significance of one color over another color. And as that movement progresses, I mean, the Blue Rider group really only lasts about eight months or so, but it really kind of sends all of those artists on this very bold trajectory in which they're really pushing the boundaries. Around 1913, they start to, and I keep saying they, because they're all still good friends, but they're now kind of moving in slightly different directions. But they start to kind of explore a little bit more geometrical. Okay, so let's just take a look at some of these. These are really from the, so in 1911, you can see this is the kind of the height of the Blue Rider group, and which during this period of time, really probably the most famous paintings by Franz Marc are painted. So we're talking about some, I think it was Heidi talked about, or Heidi was talking about the fox. Someone else painted the cow. So here's this. This might be the most famous painting by Franz Marc. The yellow cow. This one's just a little bit more complicated. You could certainly do this painting. I've chose the white cat because it's a little bit simpler. Here's the fox. And it's funny because I've seen this fox named different things, like the blue fox, or the purple fox, the red fox, or just fox. More horses. So you could start to see here in the late 1912s, early 1913, where his work starts to become a little bit more geometric, and that's owing to the influence of Cubism and Futurism, two kind of big art movements that have sprung up around the exact same time. So it's kind of remarkable. In like 1908, 1910, you've got like 5 different major art movements exploding throughout Europe, and news of those different movements, images of those artworks, and exhibitions of those artworks are traveling all around. It would have been a really exciting time to be a painter. It would have felt like, whoa, like there is groundbreaking, earth-shattering innovations in painting happening everywhere on Earth right now. Like people have come up with totally new ways of painting that really no one had seen ever before, and it's all happening all at the same time. And so it would have just, I think, like that idea of the avant-garde, which is a military term that means the front lines, the people that are on the tip of the spear in a war, right? They are the forward marching troops, right? So they're the ones that are breaking through into, enemy territory. They're taking heavy casualties. They're taking all the slings and arrows, fearlessly charging into the enemy gunfire kind of thing, if you think of the avant-garde like that. So you just imagine being a young artist and you're just like, whoa, like the what we previously knew about art is just being completely shattered from every direction all at once. Like, wow, like which direction do I go in? There's so many interesting new things that are happening right now. And so, artists like Franz Marc are like, whoa, look at what Cubism, look what Futurists are doing. What are the Vorticists doing? Oh my goodness, like so you start to see some of these more angular features, which are typical of those 3 different art movements I just mentioned here. Right, and then you start to see become much more, I wouldn't even say like Cubist or Futurist, or maybe a little bit of Vorticist kind of work here. But one starts to imagine if Franz Marc had not passed away at the, just a few years from now on the front lines, on the actual front lines, not just the painting front lines, what on earth would he have gone to paint in the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s and 50s and beyond, right? You can see, for those of you who might already be aware of artists, particularly like Vasily Kandinsky, really Franz Marc's best friend and one of the co-founders of the Blue Rider group, you can see this is very similar to what Kandinsky would ultimately be creating. I think Kandinsky was starting to do some of this stuff at the same time, But I think around this time, Kandinsky has been conscripted into the Russian army and sent, and has gone back to Russia. Okay. I mean, I think these are all wonderful paintings. They're not as well known as, let's say, this period, the kind of Blue Rider period, and right before he went into this more abstract phase. I mean, we would consider today's painting technically an abstraction, and some people would even say that really all painting is an abstraction of reality. That even if you make a painting, photorealistic painting of a cat, it's obviously not the cat itself. It's an abstraction of reality. The reality being the cat itself, right? A photograph is also technically an abstraction from reality. It's pulled out of its original context, and there is distortions that are happening, right? Again, that's something we don't necessarily think of, but the camera it's not as much as people would like to say, like, evidence of reality. It's not reality itself. It's an image of reality, right? Okay, I'm going down a rabbit hole. Let's this, right at the height of his powers, World War I breaks out in 1914, and initially a lot of people, a lot of young men, artists even, are kind of excited about the prospect of war, because they were kind of used to their grandfather's war, in which, a whole town where everyone would dress up in these fancy outfits and they would go marching into a field, and there'd be another army on the other side and they're shooting muskets back and forth, and there's some cannon explosions, and 5 or 6 people die, and then everyone goes for beers afterwards. I'm simplifying things. Not that there wasn't horrors in wars before World War I, but World War I is a scale of like this mechanized war machine that really people hadn't seen before. I mean, there were some examples like the Crimean War shortly before that, where or we even say the American Civil War, where you start to see, like, whoa, this is not my grandfather's war. This is something way more violent and gruesome than had ever been seen before. But still, for a lot of, I mean, you can still see the same thing in wars today. They're often young guys are like, I can't wait to get out there and get my hands dirty, only to realize, like, it's not all fun and games, and not everybody returns home a hero, right? A lot of people come back in pieces, sometimes physically, but also mentally shattered, right? So, anyway, Franz Marc is drafted into the German army at the beginning of World War I. And he's originally signs up as a cavalryman, so riding around on a horse, which must have made him really excited at first, because he's one thing about Franz Marc is he called part of his style the animalization of art. He saw animals, and one reason he painted animals so much is he saw animals as sort of separate from humans, that humans were these terrible creatures that are just destroying the world, and they have all of these psychological, mental kind of issues that cloud all kinds of relationships, whereas animals were sort of perfect, and they don't have all of the baggage that us humans have, and so therefore animals make the perfect art subject matter, because they're unencumbered with all of these conflicted kind of qualities that humans have. They're closer to this just pure nature, as he would have said, right? So he must have, and we've done a painting Franz Marc did of a horse. And so the fact that he's a cavalryman, he's around horses, he's training horses, he's taking care and grooming horses as in his role in the military, he must have been like, this is kind of like the dream. And I'm sure he also started to see the violence happening around him and kind of holding onto that horse and is like, oh my goodness, I'm sorry this is happening, big guy. Like, I mean, look at what us terrible humans are doing, as he's brushing the hair of this horse. Like, if only we were all beautiful horses just running through the forest and we weren't killing each other. Horses don't tend to kill one another, right? So in that sense, he would have felt like an even greater connection to the beliefs and ideals he had that he injected into his paintings. He brought sketchbooks with him to the front, and the day he died in the Battle of Verdun, his sketchbook was left behind. And I was just looking at some video of it just yesterday, and I was like, oh, whoa! In fact, I'll put the link in the description below. But I was just like, oh my goodness! Like, that's what he was doing, like the day he died. Oh, it's just like. The tragedy is hard to believe because, it's a great example of like an incredible artist whose life is cut tragically short, really just as that rocket is taking off. Other famous examples of artists who died too young, or kind of right when they're taking off. Vincent van Gogh, quite famously. Here in Canada, Tom Thompson would be an excellent example. And we could talk about musicians. People talk about all great musicians die at age 27, like Jim Morrison and Kurt Cobain and Jimi Hendrix and who's the singer from the Big Brother Holding Company? Janis Joplin, right? So. Anyway, he lived to 36, so it wasn't part of the 27 club. I think in art, in fact, it's kind of interesting now that I think about it. Around 36, 38 is where a lot of artists who also kind of die young. They die a decade later. So I need to look at those numbers a little bit. Okay. Let's just maybe take a quick little look here. So he dies, I think it's like one of the first days of the Battle of Verdun. So March 14th, 1916. Let's just look here. What did I say? Was it March 4th? Oh. So the Battle of Verdun is... bring this up here. This is one of the first big battles of World War I. It's here in France, just near the south of the Belgian border, near Luxembourg here. And it is... I mean, it's a meat grinder. It is terrible. But you can see that battle officially starts on February 21st. Franz Marc, clearly one of the first waves of troop to go to those front lines, dies just less than 2 weeks after that battle begins. And that battle, which lasts, on and off really for the next like 9 months, 10 months. Let's see how many people die here. 250,000, but 300,000 people die on the battlefield on both sides of the war. And so this is just really between Germany and France. This is before England arrives to the front, before Canadian, American, Indian, Australian, New Zealand troops start arriving there. So this is like really, the war has just begun. But 300,000 people die in 8 months on this hallowed ground here. But what's even more tragic, you're talking about almost, 800,000 men are seriously wounded, right? Some, probably 30% maybe are patched up and sent back to fight again and probably die in subsequent combat. But just the huge amounts of wounded soldiers is also just because the hospitals behind the front lines are just flooded with people who have wounds ranging from, twisted an ankle or a finger got blown off or shot off to like people missing limbs, or people who are suffering from what we call now PTSD, or they called back then shell shock, who are just mentally shattered. So it's hard to kind of quite measure kind of the tragedy of this great artist dying at such a young age. One of the to compound it, after Franz Marc passes away, his work is later exhibited as part of what Adolf Hitler described as degenerate art. They would have these big exhibitions in Nazi Germany of art that they thought were upstanding, good artwork of sort of almost not quite photorealist, but what they call like naturalist or realist painting of like people working in the fields, strong, blonde, blue-eyed men and women doing good, healthy things. And then next door they had a showcase of degenerate art, as they called it, including lots of works by Franz Marc, Kandinsky, other members of the Blue Rider group, as well as Matisse and Picasso and all of these other great artists that we know today. So after he died, his own countrymen really tried to tar and feather his reputation by trying to destroy as much of it as possible. So in fact, a lot of Franz Marc's paintings were lost, destroyed. Maybe some of them survive still to this day, hidden in attics and maybe inside of walls where people didn't want them to be destroyed. But okay, so let's just before I move on, I just want to take a quick little moment just to talk about today's painting itself and what makes today's painting so special. I'll talk a little bit about the color choices that Franz Marc used here. Okay, so here's the website of the Kunstmuseum Moritzburg in Halle, Germany. We can see these are the highlights from the museum's collection. And today's painting itself. So we see that the painting 1912, oil on cardboard. Cardboard is not the same thing as the cardboard we know today. That your Amazon package comes in. Cardboard 100 years ago is more of like what's inside one of these panels. I mean, it is technically paper and it's pressed paper, but it's not corrugated cardboard, that has the kind of, when you're looking at corrugated cardboard from the side and you see that kind of ripple wave going through, it's just like paper that's been kind of pressed into like a hard shape, and that it was used for similar purposes as we use cardboard today. It was used for making boxes and shipping things, protecting artwork from getting damaged. You put some cardboard over top of it. But that also meant that there was lots of cardboard around, right? For, you know, especially, again, this is a time before everything is wrapped in plastic, right? So if you're a young artist in and around the early 1900s, you could certainly buy canvas, stretch it over a wooden frame, but you could just go for a walk down any alleyway and just find more cardboard than you could carry, that you could turn into paintings, right? Some of it's got tomato stains on it, and you just cut that part off and you use a smaller part of it. So very, very common that artists used cardboard back in the day. We see, you know, particularly like Toulouse-Lautrec is an artist I think of as who painted a lot of artists doing in the Moulin Rouge in Paris at this time. A lot of his paintings were painted on cardboard. I even sort of sometimes think Toulouse-Lautrec might have been in the Moulin Rouge, and the people are doing the can and stuff, and he just ran out of materials, and he just asked the waiter, "Could you bring me an old box from the kitchen? I want to do a painting or do a sketch on some cardboard." And like, "Oh yeah, here's a hello monsieur, here's a piece of cardboard for your next masterpiece." Okay. What was I gonna say? Actually, let's just go to my image here. Okay, so I mentioned before that the Blue Rider group and specifically Franz Marc, today's artist, had paid special significance to colors, that they thought certain colors elicited certain kinds of had spiritual meanings, and not only that, could elicit spiritual feelings in the viewer, that the viewer themselves may not know about these associations, but they would sort of unconsciously, as they're standing in front of a painting, be sort of washed over with just the formal qualities of the painting, but that those colors were influencing their perception in ways that the viewer might not be aware of. So, for instance, as I mentioned before, white was a color that for Franz Marc kind of symbolized like peacefulness, serenity, rest. And yellow represented the femininity, joy, exuberance, happiness, frivolity, and red represented intense emotions, sometimes violence, conflict. It could also represent heartbreak, heartache, sadness, depression, and so what Franz Marc is doing in this particular painting is he sort of got, this, on one side, the yellow side is this joy, carefree living, and on the other side is like heightened emotion, intensity, all the way to like violence or pain, physical, mental anguish, those types of things. And in the center you have this white cat that represents peacefulness, right? So you might think of it as these sort of two competing emotional states that are sort of flanking the cat, and then the cat itself is sort of making peace between these two emotional states. The cat is sort of tempering the the extreme joy and happiness of the yellow, and also tempering down the intense, raw, maybe more angry qualities of the red. And so that the white is sort of existing as sort of like a peacemaker between two kind of warring, conflicting states of being. Now, whether you look at that and you see like, oh, look at that cat is doing a great job of keeping two opposing forces at bay, or you're just like, oh, it's a pretty picture of a cat. I don't know what the big deal is. I don't really believe in all this hogwash that Franz Marc was talking about here. That's fine. Franz Marc would probably even say, it doesn't even matter if you believe it or not, but it's working. It's doing its thing. And you could say, I don't think it's doing its thing. And you might say, well, how do you feel when you look at this painting? Oh, I feel kind of peaceful and relaxed. And Franz Marc, there you go. See, I gotcha. I don't know. It's up to you to decide how effective that is or not, whether you believe those ideas or not. I found while putting together this research, as I said, Franz Marc was really into animals. His kind of goal for painting was to do the animalization of art, because he saw animals as being these pure forces in the world that maybe the way out of all of humanity's problems is if we behaved a little bit more like animals. Now, when we hear that today, we think animals are just like wild, out of control. They're just like, I've got a little daughter, and sometimes, when she's being all wild, it's like, you little wild animal. Franz Marc saw it as almost kind of the opposite, though, is like that animal, like that we as humans, we're the wild, out of control, chaotic, violent, unpredictable forces in the world, whereas the animals, those are the ones that are kind of innocent, and maybe they have conflict every once in a while, but and maybe they eat each other every once in a while, but for the most part, there's kind of a nice kind of circle of life, and it's humans that are kind of interrupting and injecting all this chaos into the pastoral world that existed before us. And so, of course, at the time he made today's painting, he's living in, so he's living in this town, Sindel, how do I pronounce it? Sindelsdorf. He's living in Sindelsdorf, which is, let's see if we just collapse this, which is, here's Munich. He's living with his wife just south of Munich in this little village here. We zoom in. I wasn't able to find exactly where his house is, although it's possible that this location here, this Gartenlaub, Franz Marc Gartenlaub, might have been the location of where his house is. I tried to, doing a little Google Maps here to see if I could figure out what it is we're looking at. I don't know if this is just like a little square, or if potentially Franz Marc and his partner lived in a house maybe in this neighborhood here somewhere. This just gives you an idea, though, of kind of like this place where he lived. I'm sure there's lots more houses, and it's a little bit more developed than it was 100 years ago, but it still kind of has this kind of nice small town charm here. And so in this little house where he's living, him and his partner, they have a bunch of cats. I think they had, I was going to say 3 cats, but now I'm trying to wonder if if Shiva and Shiva's 3 cats have gotten in my mind, and now I'm thinking about Franz Marc having 3 cats. I'm not sure off the top of my head how many cats they had, but it is kind of neat to look at these paintings of cats that he did. So he's painting these paintings from life. These cats are crawling around, playing and fighting and eating and sleeping, and he's sketching these pictures of cats. Again, the great tragedy is you think like all of this research, all of these sketches and drawings, think of like all of the paintings he could have made had he not died just a few years after this. Or I guess technically 6 years after some of these right here, but you know, it's also tragic just thinking about like going from this such a peaceful existence of just, you know, you're living in this little town and you're making paintings of cats, and you know, you're maybe going for walks in the nearby forest and rivers. What could be more beautiful? And then to find yourself a few years later in the bloodiest conflict that humanity had ever seen up until that point, and dying in that meat grinder. It's just like, I mean, it's the mind, it just defies all comprehension. Just imagine how suddenly, like, it must have felt like going from, you know, heaven on earth into the depths of hell itself. I haven't seen this or read this book, Revered and Reviled, A Complete History of the Domestic Cat. Interesting. Okay. You know what? I think it's time to get to painting here. I think I've talked excessively about the biography of today's artist, so let's get to work here. Okay, so one thing that you could do, well, it sounds like I got a package, but let's just keep painting. The doorbell just rang. I put the yellow in the wrong place. So this is what happens when I don't have my labels on them. I put my warm yellow. In fact, just to... since this is a beginner episode, so I don't confuse anybody. Put my warm yellow there. I was also about to kind of go into an explanation about things, and then I start putting the colors in the wrong place, and it's like, you know what, maybe let's just do... maybe this is... it's like a one step at a time, walk, and then get home and chew gum kind of day. Trying to do all those all at once. Maybe not. Maybe today is not the day for. Ooh, I do feel it starting to heat up. My goodness. Okay, so I just put my paints down on my palette. Again, you can notice I got my 2 yellows, 2 reds, and 2 blues, plus white. I have a tube of black paint that I could use if I wanted to. But I've had this tube of black paint since the very first painting classes that we did, almost, what, 4.5 years ago. So as you can see, there's still plenty left in here. I like to mix my own black, and I tend to think of black itself as like a fire extinguisher, only used in case of emergency. So if you want, you could do all of today's episode with actual black. You don't have to mix the paint as I'm about to do today. But just know that you can make your own black from all these beautiful colors. I think that's really cool. Okay, so the reason why I brought up this this concept of the underpainting is lots of different artists use this term very differently, and I'm sure there's probably going to be somebody in the chat, no, that's not actually what an underpainting is. Who is this fool? Burn him! Burn him! So just so you know that there are so many different ways that you can interpret the what an underpainting is. I tend to use underpainting these days as maybe doing a little bit of outlining in areas where you might be afraid you might accidentally paint details out. So I think what I'm about to do in maybe 10 minutes is paint the cat kind of a white, maybe a little bit more purpley white, but let's say I do that and I paint over the eyes and the ears, and then I'm like, oh no, I lost the features. How am I going to paint this? I'm screwed. Well, the underpainting is a way for us to go and put some of those lines in now so that if I cover it with paint, I'm not screwed. However, there's some artists who will use underpainting. They might combine the Imprimatura with the, I might even combine the underdrawing with the Imprimatura and what I will also consider my background step and foreground step, like all into one action kind of thing. For the purposes of these classes, I've broken them down into kind of as many steps as possible. First of all, it makes it easier for people to jump ahead in the timeline because there's timestamps below. But also just so that it's, especially for a beginner artist, to see, kind of get into a routine, that we can do this, and then this, and then this, and then this, as opposed to kind of this combining, boiling them all down into one step. And if you're a beginner, like, oh my goodness, I'm like, when do we do this and when do we do that? I'm a little bit confused and overwhelmed. I'm trying to simplify things as much as possible. Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit of underpainting. So to do that, really, we could use any color for an underpainting, as long as it's kind of dark enough that it might show up later on through subsequent layers. So, you can really pick any color you want. I think I'm going to go for, what should we go? I think I might go for a bit of a purple. I mean, we have black. He uses a bunch of black around all these areas. But I think I'm going to go for a bit of a purple. Come on, let's go back. So to mix a purple, I'm going to take, and for a really nice vibrant purple, I'm going to take my cool red and my warm blue. And this is going to give me really beautiful, bright, saturated purple. Now it looks beautiful. I mean, it might look kind of dark on camera right now. But if I kind of stretch it out, thin it out a bit, it lightens up and you can see that purple. Now, what's going to happen though is when I paint this purple onto my yellow background, all of the beautiful aspects of this purple are going to disappear because I'm mixing this, I'm sort of mixing purple on top of the yellow, and essentially that is one way to make a black, is by mixing red and blue and yellow together. If I get them in the right if I get them in the right quantities, then the right ratio, then those colors are going to cancel each other out and turn into black. Now, typically, you know, if I was doing maybe one of my more advanced paintings in these as part of one of these episodes, I would just skip this process altogether and just start painting. Because I feel confident enough in my own ability that if I was to accidentally paint those eyes out and I was unable to find them, I'd be like, I'll just kind of wing it, I'll eyeball it. It doesn't have to be perfect. We could do the image transfer again if we were really up the creek and we couldn't find those lines. And I've done that many a times. But lining it back up again is really difficult. So for instance, I'm trying to think if I can demonstrate that today. If I lost the details, let's say in the face of the cat, what I would do is just cut out, let's say, the entire shape of the cat from my original template here, and then try to line it back up as best as possible. So again, I literally would cut along the edge with a pair of scissors, put that back over top, maybe put a little bit of tape down, and then slide my carbon paper in between and then retrace the internal lines out. In fact, maybe I'll try to demonstrate that later in this episode so that you can see how it could work. So, I mean, I consider kind of what I'm doing right now a little bit unnecessary. But if you were to try to, let's say you skipped this step and just started painting and you lost all your pencil lines, you might go, oh, now I see why he did that. Oh, I guess he's not such an idiot after all. Or if you did it and you're still able to see the lines, you're like, he really is an idiot after all. It's not until you maybe 30 paintings down the line where you run into this, maybe that problem of accidentally covering up your pencil lines, you go like, oh, yeah, not quite as much of an idiot. Like, I think about that all the time. So I teach at an art school, art university here in Vancouver. Considered to be the best university art school in Canada, by the way. Just saying. But if what was I gonna say? Oh, the reason I was saying that is, you know, sometimes I'll get each teacher gets feedback from the students. The students have to kind of do a little bit of writing of feedback on the course of the teacher. And generally, most of the feedback I get from students is really positive. But occasionally there's somebody who's like, well, What a waste of time. I didn't learn anything in this class. Like, what a joke. What an idiot. And I think, okay. That's kind of the way I thought when I was 18. A lot of my students are like 17, 18, 19, 20 years old. And of course, you know, when you're 18 years old, you've pretty much figured out how the universe works, and really nothing new exists, right? We've all been there. It's not until, you know, I thought the same way about all my teachers. I thought they were a bunch of morons just wasting my time. And then you get like 20 years after art school and you're like, oh, you know what? I just realized that that idiot was right after all. They're still an idiot, but they're right. Anyway, I just find it funny. I'm just like, okay, well, maybe in 20 years I'll go for coffee and you tell me if you still think you didn't learn anything and it was a complete waste of time. Okay, let's blow dry this. So I just use the hairdryer just to dry my lines down, so that as I'm moving on to my next step, I don't smudge or smear that paint. It wouldn't be a disaster if that happened, but maybe when you see what I'm going to do here in the next step, you'll be like, oh, yeah, I guess it probably would be helpful if this was nice and dry. Oh, Barbara says, I've had COVID for the last 2 weeks, only just testing negative at last. It was pretty mild because I was vaccinated, but still knocked me out. My goodness, Barbara. I'm glad that you're okay. As I think many of you know, earlier this summer I finally caught COVID for myself for the very first time. And wow, I realized it's no joke. And I'm glad I was vaccinated. I'm not going to get into that whole topic, but man, if that's how it hit me and I was vaccinated, ooh, I wouldn't want to think about what would happen if I hadn't done that. But Heidi says, remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for Heidi, I appreciate that. Barbara says, this is a lovely painting. I could spend my life drawing and painting cats. I'd need 9 lives. Heidi says, painting cats is particularly therapeutic to me. Barbara says, Michael, you can't please everyone all the time. You created a safe place for that student to vent some disgruntled nonsense, and we all love you. Best teacher ever. Oh, thanks, Barbara. I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, you got to take all criticism in stride as much as possible. Like, just yesterday I got some pretty nasty comments here on the Facebook, or my YouTube page here, and definitely, you know, for like an hour, just like, oh my, how am I going to respond to that? Like, oh man. And then it's like, you know what? Most of the time when people, including myself, are upset about something they see or do, often a lot of it has more to do with ourselves than whatever else is going on outside of ourselves, right? So just try to remember that, and you know, whatever somebody is going through in life. Okay. Okay, so let's move on to the next step. Okay. So now that we've got our image on the canvas, we put the Imprimatura, that yellow stain there, and then I did my underpainting by tracing out the outlines of the cat. I'm going to go in and start painting my background. And as you'll see, kind of what I like to do is start working a little bit on the background, go to the middle ground, go to the foreground, paint that, and then go back to the background and maybe work a little bit more there, maybe finish it off, and then keep moving through the painting in these cycles or passes. Right, so I'm going to do right now my first pass around the background. So let's take a look at what we want to do to get the background started here. Now, as I said, I'm going to try to do this painting in a relatively short period of time. So I'm going to try to do as little fussing as possible. And some of you are like, "Oh, really? Let's see you do a painting without a lot of fussing, Michael." So it's almost in many ways, you know, it's a challenge trying to reproduce a painting exactly as you see it, and that's why some of these episodes take 6, 8, 10 hours to do. There's also a challenge in trying to take a great painting and boil it down, simplify it into its simplest qualities so that it can be painted relatively quickly, especially by people who might be literally painting their very first painting of all time. So I usually, again, I like to start with things as far back in space as possible. And so when I look at this painting, the things that are the furthest away would seem to be, let's say, this purple color here. Now that same purple color is also here in the bottom right. And so potentially we could use the same purple there as there. However, I might use two different purples just to kind of create a bit more space. Remember I talked about warm and cool colors can help create more space. So I've got this beautiful purple that we mixed to use to paint the outlines of the cat, the underpainting. I'm going to use this same color for the bottom right here, which in some ways I think could technically be the thing closest to us. But I'm just going to, but since I've got this color here nice and wet and ready to go, I'm going to take a little bit of my white and my purple that I mixed previously. And I am just going to put this here. So after talking about how I want to start with the thing furthest in the background, here I am painting the thing that arguably could be the closest thing. So arguably this could be in our foreground. But I think what I'm going to, for the purpose of this video, we'll consider the cat to be the thing in the foreground. Okay, so I want to just kind of mention a couple things off the top. So I took the same color that I used to paint these lines is in the bottom right corner. The only difference is that I added white to that color. So obviously it's going to appear lighter than these lines that don't have white in them, right? Because white's going to lighten that color. It's going to make it a little bit more pastel. And by adding white, it's a process we call tinting a color, right? So we just tinted the purple and painted it here. So yes, it obviously is lighter. This one, though, is also, as we mentioned, is darker than maybe it even appears on the palette, because underneath is that yellow, and we get yellow, red, and blue all kind of intersecting. They're going to get pretty close to black. The other thing, too, by adding white into this color is it's going to block out, it's becoming more opaque, and it's going to cover up the yellow beneath it. Now, you can still see little bits of yellow coming through here. I kind of like that, so I think I'm just going to keep that. But let's see if we look at these two side by side. I notice there's a little bit of white in here, so maybe I'm just going to take a little bit more paint that's got a little bit more pure white on there. And since this paint down here is still pretty wet, I can mix that in and paint a bit of that. Maybe I'll get a little bit more white even. Right. And if I go like, ugh, I put too much white on there, what am I doing? Well, let's just wipe a bit of it off. All right, I'm gonna wipe a bit of that off. I wipe a bit off on my brush, and then I'm just gonna go back in here. But oh no, when I wiped it off, oh, excuse me, that snuck up on me. When I wiped it off, I wiped off a bit of the purple, and now it's a little bit lighter underneath. Oh my goodness, what a catastrophic series of events. Just remember, it's just a painting, right? The whole world is going to be fine. I'm just kind of trying to blend it in so it kind of works nicely. I'll leave it like that, and if I decide, you know what, it needs to be a little bit more opaque, I'm seeing too much of the yellow coming through, then we'll do another layer. Okay. I'm going to ideally hope that that's good enough for now. Now I want to go and paint the purple in the background, that area right in the top that I mentioned there. Now I could use the same color, and if you wanted to use that same color, I certainly would not fault you for doing so. However, just because this is a class, I want to show you what might happen if we used a different mixture of colors. Maybe a slightly cooler purple, slightly more muted purple. We put that in the background and see if we can notice a difference between these colors. So let's say instead I'm going to take my, we'll begin the same way, take my cool red here, and I'm going to take my cool blue and mix these guys together. This is a bit more of a reddish purple, so let's... Now, we're not going to see a huge difference here, right? These, but let's say if we take a bit of white, this color is going to be slightly more muted, not quite as... Now, I didn't even put as much white in there, and it already seems a little bit less saturated. So let's keep this available. Let's make one more purple mixture. So I'm going to take my cool blue and my warm red, and now let's mix these two guys up here. Now maybe you can see already how this purple isn't playing as nicely, or those two colors mixed together aren't really creating a very vibrant purple at all, right? It's because those two colors are pretty much opposite one another on the color wheel. And when we mix them together, they're almost canceling each other out, making a black. We just need a bit of yellow in there. We'd make a black. So we've got like this being the most vibrant purple, this being not quite as vibrant, but close, and this one being a very dark, not very vibrant color at all. So depending, you know, if we want that to kind of recede into the background, we may want to use a less vibrant purple. So, you know, probably my instinct, well, I think though I'm going to go for this one after all of that. I'm going to use one that's not quite as vibrant. In fact, maybe let's take a little bit of these two colors. Let's put, do I want to do that? Or is that confusing? Let's not be too confusing, Michael. Let's just use this color here. So I'm just going to use my cool red, cool blue, white. I'm just going to paint this in this back in this area. Again, not much of a difference. There is a difference. And especially if these two colors were closer together, side by side, I think we might be able to discern a bit more of a difference. You'll notice I like kind of painting the edges of the painting personally. You don't have to do this. I'd say probably most people don't. But it's something I've always kind of found to be a little bit important. I like the edge. I like seeing the edge. Okay, put a little bit of white in here. Let's just brush a bit of white. I mean, there was white already, but I'm putting a bit more just so we can have maybe just some areas that are a little bit different. Now there's, again, a little bit of yellow coming through on both sides. I don't mind that. If I was like, it's too much yellow coming through, I'm going to fix it. Well, we could blow dry this and do another layer. In fact, I'm going to do another layer just here just so you can maybe see the difference. So the reason I'm blow drying is if I keep trying to paint on top of wet paint, the paint's going to mix in, which can be kind of nice, but it's also, at some point, I'm just going to be kind of almost scraping the paint off as I'm trying to apply paint on there, and that can be kind of frustrating. I think I want this purple to be a little bit more on the reddish side, so I'm just mixing a bit more red in here. Maybe I should put a bit more white back there, but should I put a bit more white in there? Let's mix a bit more white. You know, I could have even added even more red. The more I look at that, the more I think like, you know, that should be a bit more on the pink side of things. So how about let's actually do that. So I'm going to take a bit of pink right out of the tube. Or sorry, my cool red. And I'm just going to paint this right on top of here. How's that? Closer, I think I could put even more white in there. But you know, close enough is good enough. We have the rest of our lives to worry about perfection. And I would say it's a foolish thing to worry about, is making something perfect. The paradox is generally the more you strive towards perfection, the worse your artwork gets. The more you let go and allow for a little bit more chaotic personality to come through, the better it gets. And I would say that pretty much throughout the entire history of art. You know, if you're coming from a different line of work, maybe mathematics or rocket science, you know, it's pretty important to get those numbers right? That could be the difference between landing on the moon or exploding in outer space and killing all the astronauts, right? But in painting, different ball game altogether. Okay, so what else should we paint next? I see these. See these greens up here. So let's paint a little bit of green. Now that green is probably our cool blue. Oh, sorry, so point that out. So the greens that I see are right up here, right? So I'm going to take my cool blue, cool yellow, because we want this big bright green in the background. Let's mix more of it. Beautiful. Beautiful green. Now, however, if we just paint that green, let's say just right here, well, that's okay. I was going to say maybe we might want to put a bit of white in there, but since there's the yellow underneath, that works quite well. The one thing I would say, though, is that it's also kind of a little bit darker back there. So what I'm going to do to kind of just darken this a little bit, I'm just going to take a bit of my cool red. Just put a bit of cool red in here. What that does is it just darkens this color. It's pulling the green towards the center and in the middle of the, just so you can see the difference there. That was not a lot of red, but look how much kind of just more muted, darker it looks. Once again, I'm just going to so there's a little stripe of red there that I accidentally painted over. I just wiped it away. When I do paint red on there, that could be slightly darker, that area, but I don't think it's going to be catastrophic. Okay, now let me show you something. So I've got this bright green. I did put a little bit of cool green or cool red in there to make it slightly darker. But let's say if I take now my warm red and I mix it into this green, if I get the ratios exactly right, I'm essentially going to make black. Now I just kind of eyeballed it, so I'm not, super concerned about making it perfect. But I get a really, if I was to put more red in here, I would make black. I didn't quite put enough in there, so it's not perfect black, but that's actually kind of okay. Because this I can use for kind of painting some of these darker greens on the cat here. Or not on the cat, in the background here. Okay, I'm just going to leave this here. I'm going to mix an actual black later on, but that's a good kind of placeholder, good start for that color. Where else? Let's move down to the blues down here. So we've got, let me see, I got to look at that a little closer. So that's like a bluish purple, actually. So when I look at that color, I think it's quite similar to the color I mixed with my cool red and my warm blue. It's just a lot more blue in there. So I'm going to take my warm blue, maybe a little bit of this purple, put that in there just to give it a bit more of that slightly purple quality. Now, let's say if I just start painting this in here, it's like, whoa, that's basically black. Oh, maybe a bit too dark. I want it to still be blue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this color, I'm going to mix some white into it. So it's going to be much lighter. And then I'm going to paint this here. And so, of course, you're probably like, but that's the wrong color, Michael. You've just ruined it. Oh, my goodness. What a disaster. Ugh. Okay, everybody. Pack it up. His students were right. He really is an idiot. You can even see I'm using a big brush. But what I'm doing is I'm just laying this color with that little bit of white down. It's going to help block out the yellow a bit. And then when this dries, I'm going to go back over top of it with the same color but without any white in it. Let's see what kind of results we can get. Okay. I think I'm going to blow dry this so that I can paint over top of it without mixing into the colors below. So I'm just going to mute the microphone. Okay, now I'm going to take this blue that I had mixed before, and I'm going to paint it over top of this. Maybe I should zoom in. So hopefully you can see how much brighter and more saturated this blue seems than had I just painted it right on the over top of that yellow. Now it kind of pops. Because less of the yellow is showing through, and therefore less of it is appearing to mix with this blue, so it has more of a vibrant quality. Right, the yellow's not neutralizing this or even turning it green at all. Right? I do though feel like now that I'm looking at these side by side that this might be a little bit too blue. Maybe it could be a bit more neutral after all when I see them up close like this. But one thing I have learned is never to fuss over the painting at this stage. If you're like, well, but I love fussing over paintings, don't take the one pleasure I have left in life away. Okay, there's still plenty of places where you can fuss over a painting, but I would say if you really like fussing, save the fussing till later, until we get this whole thing covered with paint. That way, you know, we might later on look at this same area and say, you know what? Actually, it was perfect. Here I was thinking I've got to fuss for a little while, and actually, no, it's actually totally fine. I think it's... So that's a good example of sometimes you just got to get the painting, you know, fill it in a little bit more, and then you realize, actually, it's totally fine. I'm glad I didn't spend 20 minutes just trying to, you know, work there. Now that this is also a little bit drier, I'm just going to take this same color, this really dark green. I'm just going to do another layer of this kind of dark green in these areas here. Since I've got it, and it might start to dry up pretty soon there. So it's also, I like that it's almost black, but not black. Senga says, I'm in bed watching, falling asleep, feeling very lethargic, drained. It's not been good. I'm sorry to hear that, Senga. I think we've all been there. There's days where, you know what? This is just one of those days where it's maybe just a good idea to stay in bed, take it easy, not worry. The world will keep turning, and you can jump on the ride when it comes back around the other way again, right? I think that's a really healthy way of going about things. Okay, I'm going to paint what should I do? Actually, I'm going to paint the stars first so that can dry. Then I'll paint the yellow pillow, and then I'll come back to the red. And I'll do that. That way my yellow has a bit of a chance to dry. Now, if we look at the image there, we've got this. It's a warm yellow for those stars on the bottom and on the right side. Now, I could just use, because I painted warm yellow in Imprimatura, I could just leave those things blank and just be totally happy with it. I think just sometimes it can look a little bit kind of transparent, not transparent, well, yeah, a little bit transparent, just like maybe not saturated enough. So I'm just going to take my warm yellow right out of the tube and paint here. You'll notice I'm being pretty sloppy, going outside the lines a little bit. Because I'm going to paint red over top, and that red is going to cover this pretty well. And I might even put a bit of yellow or white into my red anyway. So if I do make a mistake or I've gone a little bit over the lines, not going to be a big deal. Just double checking that I don't have any more warm red there to paint. Okay, let's clean the brush off. Also, for those of you who are brand new, notice how every time when I switch colors, I wipe my paintbrush off on a rag and then put it in the water. That means that this water, even though it kind of looks dirty, I've painted for like 12 hours straight on this channel. You can see some of those videos, and the water, even though it appears to be dirty, is still more than good enough to clean my brushes in. I wouldn't want to drink out of it, but there's no, as opposed to if I just paint and then then I'm gonna have to, if I paint this color, try to clean it off in the water, after 5 minutes, this water is gonna be filthy. I'm gonna need to clean it. Remember too, most of the time you put stuff down the sink, maybe goes to a filtration system if you're lucky. If not, it goes right out into a river, stream, ocean, lake. And what happens with these microplastics? Acrylic paint is plastic after all, and those microplastics go out into our food system, get eaten by plankton, they get eaten by fish, they end up on our dinner table. So the less plastic I'm putting into the environment, the better. Okay, let's use a different yellow now. We're going to use our cool yellow, and we're going to paint in the cushion on the right here. So you can see this, the difference between the two yellows, the yellow of the stars underneath the cat, and then the yellow of the cushion under the cat's head. So I'm going to take a big scoop of this yellow. There's a little bit of blue that got in there to make it, might be a tiny bit on the greenish side. We'll see. Now this yellow also has some white in there, so let's put some of that in there as well. Now the more white I put in, the more opaque it's the more tinted, the more pastel this yellow becomes, but the more opaque it becomes. So if I put a lot of white in here, it's possible that I cover up my pencil lines where the cushion is. I don't think that's, even if that happened, that would be a necessarily disaster, because I don't think that's where most people's attention is the folds on the couch cushion. The other thing too is I can use my small brush to paint this. And nothing wrong with that. However, it's going to take me longer, and the smaller the brush I use, the more texture is going to be visible. So I'm going to upgrade to a bigger brush. It's going to allow me to paint this much more quickly. And I'll have a little bit more control over the amount of texture that is created here. I also don't mind if I go right up to, maybe even a little bit over top of my painted lines, or my drawn lines, because after all, this cat's going to be painted white, and I can really easily cover up any mistakes with the color of the cat itself. That's probably not easy to see on camera. It might appear that my pencil lines on the couch cushions have totally disappeared. They are definitely harder to see, but I can see them. All right, so that's why I wasn't too worried about doing this layer. That's why I didn't put these underpainted lines on the couch cushions. I was like, you know what? I don't think it's going to be... I'm going to need them because I'm not going to be using that much white. Of course, depending on how you apply the paint, if you apply a really thick layer, well, yeah, of course it might be a little bit harder to see, right? Okay, let's see these side by side. Okay. Now, I could go in right now and start trying to paint in those folds, but I think I'm going to reserve that for another step. We'll do a pass on that later here. So I'm mostly at this moment just concerned about filling up this space as quickly as possible, getting all of the major colors, the big shapes in place before I start kind of doing my little details over top of it. So and that's totally subjective. There's definitely some artists that would tackle that right now and use the wetness of this, the relative wetness of this paint, to their advantage to do a little bit of blending. And if you want to do that, don't let me stop you from doing that. However, I think that can sometimes be a bit of a fool's errand, because we end up spending 45 minutes here and then the rest of the painting hasn't been touched. And the worst thing that could happen is we get this all painted in, and then you go, I just realized that yellow of the cushion is, I think it should be a little bit greenish. I spent all that time blending, and now I realize it's actually not, it's not like a yellow, it's a lime green. Why did I spend, now I gotta spend another 45 minutes fixing, right? So I'd rather get all my colors in place, and then I can see a little bit more objectively how things are, and if I want to make a change, then I can make a change at that stage. Okay, so same sort of thing here. Now I got my the red that I want to put on the right side. I think I could probably get away with just using my warm red right out of the tube. I think it's going to behave a little bit differently depending on where this paint is painted. So, you know, I just scooped basically all the paint off of my palette right onto my brush, and then I'm just going to brush it in place. Okay. So I start with that bigger brush, just getting lots of paint on the canvas. And then I'm start switching to smaller brushes. One thing I also try to do, and you know, maybe this isn't as easy if you're a total beginner, but try to do as much painting with a bigger brush as possible before I switch to a smaller brush. Because the second we start using those smaller brushes, it's very easy to start getting real nitpicky and fiddling around little details. So my personal approach is I want to try to do as much as possible with just a big brush, fill in the big shapes, and then once that's in, then I start going to my smaller brushes. Sometimes it's not always possible. Sometimes, you know, to do what we're doing right now, you might need a small brush. Like, so for instance, some of these areas in between these shapes, I'm going to need a smaller brush to get at them. But as you can see, I want to do as much here before I relinquish this brush. Okay, now going to one of my smallest brushes now, just to get these little details around the star. Another thing too, another reason why using a bigger brush is kind of nice is the bigger the brush, often the thicker the application of paint will be. So versus the smaller the brush, the less paint that brush can hold. And so you often notice that there can be a that you might need to go over the areas where you used a small brush a couple times, because that area is just a little bit more transparent than the other areas. So actually also using a big brush is just helpful in just a time saving kind of sense as well. There, smell some sort of chemical. What is that smell? There's lots of construction going on in the neighborhood right across the two homes right across the street from us are under construction, so one wonders what they could possibly be doing. It's almost like a bleach. It's like a cleaning product. It smells like. It's a little disturbing when you think, I got my door closed. I mean, there's some windows I have open in the house that's coming through, but maybe they're painting something, spraying something. I don't know. Who knows? Okay. Oops. Let's move this back into the center here. It might also be just for a second worth just looking at this here. You'll notice that the red, as I've got it here, might appear a little bit more orangey than the color on the red in the original. Now, obviously that's because we've got a yellow Imprimatura underneath. So even though I'm painting red over top of a dried yellow, our brain doesn't know the difference between layered paint versus mixed paint. So as far as my brain is considered, I've mixed a bit of yellow into this red, giving it the appearance of being slightly more orangey. Now again, you know, if I, let's say, let this dry, if I paint another layer of red over top of this, well, it's probably going to get a little bit deeper, less orange-like. Now, again, however, even though that's the way it appears right now, when I put this big white shape right on the center, that's going to change things. It's going to look, it's going to affect how all of these other colors behave. So before I just start kind of, as I said, fiddling around, I want to just be sure that it does. I don't want to do any unnecessary work, long story short. Okay, I want to look at underneath cat there is purple that I didn't even really notice until now. I think it's pretty close to the same blue that I put here on the right. So I'm going to do that before I move on here. So I'm just going to use this same color that we started with this blue. It's got a little bit of white on here. So on this side, I've just sort of, well, you know what, actually not, the more I look at it, it actually does kind of go up a little higher, doesn't it? Okay, that's probably good enough. Quick blow dry here. Let's paint this warm blue. Maybe feels almost a little bit more on the purpley side, so maybe just put a bit more of my purple in there. Okay. It's going to blow dry. I don't know why I muted the mic or unmuted the microphone before I was finished blow drying. My apologies for those people wearing headphones. Okay, let's move on to a new step now. Okay, so the next step here is I'm going to paint the cat, and or at least we're going to start painting the cat, and then I think we're going to go back to the background, finish that, and then come back, finish the cat, and then we'll be all done. So let's just, before we paint the cat, just take a look at what color we should paint this cat. So, I mean, obviously it's white. That's the name of the painting itself. Oops. Right, but it's white and it's got some purples. There's a little bit of green there, a little bit of blue in there, certainly black outlines. So even though it's technically a white cat, I'm actually going to have a bit of a purplish quality to it. That way, if I want to lighten some areas up, I've got a little bit of white that I can kind of brighten those highlights of. Like, so, for instance, like, you know, on the leg here, in the front of the face, this arm, we can go back and put pure white on those areas. There'll be just that little bit of contrast is going to make it look like there's brighter, as opposed to painting it all white and then just darkening everything around it. I want to kind of start maybe a little bit halfway, and then I can lighten or darken. Essentially what we're doing here, or what I'm trying to do, is what we would call the local color. I'm trying to locate the local color. The local color is the color before it's been modified with highlights or shadows. So like the local color of this is a green, right? Particular kind of green. But I want to try to find the green that's not where the light is hitting the top of it. Right? I don't want that green. I also don't want this dark green on the edges here, right? I probably want a green that's like that green or that green. That way I can just add more black, or I can darken this, and I can lighten this, and then I can just leave these areas alone. Right? Does that make sense? Okay, so let's decide what kind of purple we want to use. I think what I want to do is I want to use my cool red and warm blue. So this mixture we've got here, right, is kind of a nice, really intense, beautiful purple. But I'm going to use like 95% white with just a little bit of this purple. So to start, let's take a big scoop. Where should we do this? Maybe let's do this right here. Now there's already a bit of yellow in there, and maybe even a little bit of purple already. So we don't need a lot. That might even be too much. In fact, let's let it be a bit too much. Okay, once again, I'm going to take one of my bigger brushes. So you can see this is no longer just a pure white. It's a very subtle purpley white. And you can see when I paint over top of the cat's face, now because I did my underpainting, I'm not even the slightest bit concerned about losing my pencil lines. Because those darker lines that I painted there are going to show through. I mean, even I'm painting this pretty thick, right? I may even just kind of go back over, just take some of that paint so I can spread it around. So if you are concerned, you're like, I did the underpainting and I still can't see my lines. Well, just take your brush while you're painting this and just wipe a bit of that paint off and apply it elsewhere. So because this is almost pure white, I mean, there's a little bit of purple in here. That means that if there were areas where my red or my blue had accidentally overlapped in those areas, I can use this color to kind of go back over those spots. And you know, just kind of paint over. It's like those areas just disappear. Now, what has happened here is I've kind of almost run out of paint. I basically have that. I don't have enough paint to get all of the cat done. Right? That's very, very typical. Now, I did this deliberately because I want to show you it's not the end of the world. And how would you overcome this problem? Because this happens all the time. Mixing the exact same color a second time is close to impossible. Probably have better odds at winning the lottery than mixing a color exactly the same a second time around. So I'm just doing this so you see that it's not going to be exactly the same. Even an experienced painter isn't going to get it the same. I can get it close. We'll see how close I got it. But I'm not worried about making it perfect. All right, it's probably going to be a little bit lighter, a little bit darker. It's hard to say. So usually what I would suggest when you're doing this kind of thing is maybe just mix just a little bit more paint than you think you need. Because you almost always need more paint when you're mixing a color, especially big areas of a painting. You know, if you're just painting a little thing like a star, well, you could probably have a pretty clear estimate as to how much paint you actually need for an area like that. But just in my experience, the decades or so I've been teaching, I'd say 90% of the time people grossly underestimate how much paint they'll need to, let's say, paint a sky, or in this case, the cat. Now, I might have made it look, you know, I've been doing this for decades now, so I might have made it look really easy to remix that color. Maybe I should have deliberately done a poor job on there. It probably would have been a better learning experience for people to see that even if they're two very different colors, that it's not going to matter so much, but that's what happens when you're too good, you know. You just can't help but making masterpieces, I guess, folks. Even when I try to fail, I make masterpieces. It's funny because it's not true. It's just, you know, decades literally of practice. You get better and better, and it becomes easier and easier. Now maybe I'll zoom in. I was gonna say it's hard to see, so let's see if we can see. So you might see that there's little gaps here. I'm not too concerned about getting this all perfect because I'm gonna go over all of these areas. I'm gonna outline them anyway. So I'm not going to like fuss around and try to, like sometimes I see people at this stage, they are using their smallest brush and they're like, oh, this is not perfect. Gotta make it perfect. Gotta make it perfect. Oh no, look at this terrible sloppy area. Oh, the paint police, they're going to come and drag me away any minute. You know, like Monty Python, the Spanish Inquisition. Boom, the door busts in. It's the Spanish Inquisition. Thankfully, we don't have paint police, or at least maybe not yet. You never know. That I can paint that in there and not worry about getting in trouble. Now, one thing I do notice is this kind of layer that I put on the right side was applied much more thickly than the stuff over here. Remember, because I also put that down, then I kind of used my brush to spread it out, make it a little more transparent. That does mean there's a bit more yellow showing through there. So, that could be a problem. Let's blow dry it, because often when we dry the paint, it can lighten or darken, become more opaque or less or more transparent. So let's just blow dry it and just see if we can notice any kind of significance. Okay, so now that I've done that, yeah, it looks like I could see a little bit more yellow on the head of the cat. It's definitely more opaque, less yellow coming through. Some of these areas are much thicker. Personally, that doesn't bother me. If, however, you felt like, it's still too much yellow, then use a little bit more paint. That's why it's good to have a bit more paint ready to go, because often you might need to do 2 coats of a color. So if you've got that color mixed up and there's enough to do 2 coats, then you're like, yeah, no worries. I don't have to worry about remixing it. I've got plenty to go. Okay. I think I'm going to now that I've got this in, this also, I'm going to even zoom out just a second. So now that I've got basically the whole painting covered, there's none of the Imprimatura, I mean, barely any that's showing through in its pure untouched form. Pretty much just paint covering all of it. So now I can more easily observe what's working and what's not working. One of the things that I'm noticing almost immediately now is I look at the cat and I think like, boy, I'm glad I put a bit of purple in there, because, and what I often will do is I'll squint, like you can do this right now if you're looking at these, is squint your eyes like you're pretending to sleep, right? You're just sort of, your eyelashes are blurring your vision. And if you do that while you're looking at the screen, you might notice, like, even with that purple in there, gosh, I feel like it's actually still too white. Like maybe it needs to be, I could have gone for a darker purple local color than this. So that's, again, another reason why I prefer to just get everything loaded in here and then make judgments as to what needs to change. Because just imagine I just started painting all of this, the cat in, all the folds, and then I realized, oh man, it's not dark enough. Ah! Right? Or let's go back to looking at the red back here. Now it's still a little bit more on the orange side, but I can also say to myself, like, is that a make it or break it? Does this really have to be a darker red? Does this really need to be a darker purple? Right? Does this really need to have a little bit more pink in here as opposed to a bit more purple? Right? Are these blues, do they, I mean, they, I think, could be even darker. Is I didn't make it or break it? I don't think it is in any of those instances. Right? So I think I am ready to move on. And I've got to be out of this house in 45 minutes. So now we have to kind of, I got to move a little quick. I'm not going to move more quickly. I just have to be more selective about how I spend my time here. So next what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint the background, and ideally I'm going to finish the background and then move on and paint the cat and finish the cat, and then we'll be done. So really I'm mostly going to focus on maybe putting in some darker shapes, like, or darker outlines really. So if we look at the original, especially if we look at these side by side, we can see, especially on the yellow here, it gets kind of a little bit darker. All right, we've got some shading or modeling of those shapes going on. So there's lots of different ways that we can solve this problem. What I'm going to do is I'm going to mix my own black. Now we could just use black right out of the tube, but I like to mix my own black. So to mix black, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my cool yellow, my cool blue, and my warm red. And if I can get equal thirds of those three colors together, I'm going to make a perfect black. So basically, you could start by, I could have used this color that I had here, which is my cool blue, cool yellow, and I added a little bit of warm red in there, but you can still see it's on the greenish side. If I kept adding more red to it, this would actually turn black. Right? So cool blue, cool yellow, warm red. So you can see I'm not using like a scale or measuring device. I'm just eyeballing this, which is going to mean that the likelihood of making a perfect black is very low. All right, it's likely going to be a little bit, like in this instance, right now, it's a little bit brown. All right, so these, here I'm using this and this, have the same colors in them. One's gone green, one's gone brown. What does that mean? Why? What have I done wrong if it's brown? If it's brown, it means it's leaning too much towards red and maybe a bit too much towards yellow. So what I need is more blue to counteract that brown and to pull it into the middle of the painting, into what we call the neutral core here. And if I can mix that up quite thoroughly, I think that's pretty good. I think I've got a pretty good black. Now it's not going to be perfect. That's why we have actual black. If I really wanted to get it right, I got actual black I can use, and maybe I'll use it, maybe not. And so you could just use actual black and then you'd be at this stage of the process, right? One way to determine whether you've got black or not is just to take a little bit of that color and let's say take your, oops, I got a bit of white on it, or a little bit of blue on there, but so I take a little bit of this and I mix them together, I lighten it up, and I can see, now it might have just been because I took from the edge, but this is a little bit more on the purpley brown side of things. That tells me I could probably use a little bit more yellow in there to make it an actual black. But as my grandfather always used to say, good enough for government work. One of my favorite sayings of all time. Like, I remember him and I building shelves in my parents' basement in their furnace room. You know, and he liked to drink. He would drink about 3 hours work, go through a couple bottles of vodka. Good old Ukrainian man. And you know, you do all this building, and then you know, you put the level on there, and it's like it kind of goes a little bit to the right. You're like, good enough for government work. Let's go have lunch. Whoop! This is the you know, the end of day horn goes off. Yeah. It's not like we're doing anything special here. No big deal. Okay, so we got our black. Okay. Next, what I'm going to do, and there's lots of things we could do now from this stage here, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a little bit of a material here called glazing fluid or glazing liquid. This is matte or satin, same thing. I like using this because now I can take this paint and make it more transparent. So as opposed to trying to mix, I could take this yellow and I could add a little bit of white and paint in here. That works, but this I think is a little bit of an easier method. So for some people this seems like way more difficult. But I'm going to mix this glazing fluid in here. Now I'm just going to do a couple of quick layers with this color. I'm not going to spend too long on it because I don't have the time. But if you really want to get it perfect, this is a great way to do it. It's because there's a lot of flexibility here. So let's bring this back down. Now I kind of started with a lot of paint on my brush, so that's why I'm kind of doing a lot right here. I don't usually want to use that much paint. Now I'm going to take a dry brush, a totally new, different brush I haven't used before. Ideally one that's very soft, right? You want a brush like, you know, in fact, you know, you could literally use, and I have Brushes that are used for makeup, right? You want to brush it. If you brush it on your cheek, you'd be like, oh, it feels really nice. It's like a cat's tail. You don't, like, I have some other brushes that are really, they could be long or thin bristles, but are almost like using a comb, and they're going to scratch the surface. If I use a softer brush, I think I waited a bit too long to do this. I can blend this out and make for really soft edges. But I didn't. I was a little bit hurried when I did this. The other thing too is once you put the paint down, you pretty much just got to let it dry before you tinker. So I'm actually doing a bad example of that right now. Just paint with it, and then let it go. Blow dry it. Alright, so now this is still a little bit wet. I can kind of go in and just kind of soften those brush strokes out a bit. Okay. So that's a good start. Oh yeah, that's how I do it from there. Okay. So I'm just going to blow dry this now. Okay, so now that this is dry, I can go back over top of it and continue to darken just... So instead of painting this whole area, I'm going to paint just a little bit less of it. Kind of right on the top. I can even use my finger to do a little bit of blending. The other thing I like about using this method is I can use this same black on the cat and on the other areas of the painting. I don't have to worry about remixing this color dozens of times for different different shades of the painting. I can reuse it over and over. In fact, maybe let's do a little bit of that right now. I'm going to start taking my black. Let's blow dry that. Okay, and I'm just going to keep going here. So the less black I put into my glazing fluid, the more layers I have to do, because it takes longer to get a darker color. Versus the more black I put in there, the less I have to do, but it also can be a little bit tricky to do if you put a lot of black on there or into the mixture. One thing again is you have to, once you apply glazing fluid, there's a couple things. If you don't like where you've put it, you can always just take a little bit of water on a slightly damp rag and just wipe it off. But you also got to be careful about not painting over wet glaze, because what'll happen, and I see a bit of that happening down here, is it peels some of the previous layer of paint. It's like it sticks to the previous layer, and then when you're painting, it almost sort of like wipes off or peels off like a sticker. So in this instance, I actually see some of the white of the canvas coming right back through, because I was a little bit impatient and I thought I would just sort of kind of tinker with it before it was dry. And the painting goes, "Oh, you want to do that? Aha, I'm going to screw with you and make your life difficult. I got to be more patient next time, Michael." Okay. Okay, now I'm going to take a bit more of my actual black, and I'm going to take a bit more glazing fluid. Now I have a much higher ratio of like 50-50 black to glazing fluid. I mean, this is going to be pretty dark. In fact, I want to be careful about how much and where I put this. So let's zoom in here. Now I can still go even darker. I have black without any glazing fluid, which can make really sharp, dark black lines. Even darker than these lines I'm using right now. Now, this is a little bit more advanced stuff using glazing fluid. So if you don't have to use this, you could just use big, bold, black brush strokes and be done with it. But if you want this kind of shaded quality, so notice how, like, I'm just going to paint like that, and then I just use this brush just to go over and kind of smudge that out. Just rubbing against my thumb here, just to make sure I don't have any big gobs of paint stuck to the brush. Okay, that might be. Just let's see what. Oh, I guess. Okay, so there's. Okay, this is a good instance right here. Now there's the shadow on the red. I want to blow dry this rather than trying to do both sides of this. If I can, I'm gonna blow dry the bottom side so that I can do that separately, and then it just gives me more control. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put a little bit more glazing. I want it to be as dark on here as the yellow cushion. Now you might, again, so here's this area where I accidentally kind of did a little bit of painting while the glazing fluid was almost dry, so it peeled that area up. It's pretty hard to overcome that. I could try adding a little bit of red in here into this glazing fluid and try to patch it up. Or the easiest thing would be just to keep darkening that area and see, hoping it kind of, you know, maybe not completely goes away, but it just becomes harder to perceive and not such a big problem, if indeed you see it as a problem. You know, here's another instance where I just kind of went there. I don't really like how the glaze went over the star, so I'm just going to take a slightly damp cloth. And you got to be careful because, once again, you might erase too much. So I'm actually just like barely touching the surface here, just not like scrubbing it or anything. Okay. So I think I'm going to blow dry it one more time, see if I can just darken this area out a little bit more, because those are sometimes the things that bug me later on. So painting this area, got to be kind of, I'm just gently putting in there, put a little bit of paint on it, and then just leave it, maybe even blow dry it again real quick. Okay. There, that problem that was there is kind of gone away. And then you see I'm like, yeah, its problem's gone away. I should probably fiddle with that a little bit more and see if I can make it a problem again. Okay, I gotta move on from this. I got 10 minutes before I gotta wrap up. I'm cleaning this brush because it accidentally rolled into some wet paint and got a little bit of paint on the corner. The second I saw that, I'm like, I better clean that up, otherwise I'm gonna regret it. The paint dries on the corner, and then that paintbrush will forever kind of behave a little bit differently. The other thing, I'm going to use these same colors, same brushes, but I'm just cleaning them anyway because the paint starts to dry on the brush, and I want, when I do the cat, to have a nice clean brush. I don't want to, any problems I can avoid, I want to avoid, right? That sounds obvious, but it's a good idea to clean those tools frequently so they're not getting all gummed up and then you get all frustrated. Okay, beautiful. Let's push. In fact, we'll just take a quick look at how this looks next to the original, just so we can see where we're at this stage. Right, so now we've basically, I think I'm pretty happy with the background. I don't know how much more work I want to do there. Now I'm going to work on the cat itself. Okay, so let's now tackle the cat and put some shading on the cat. Background, pretty good. Maybe not perfect, but that's okay. It's not about perfection. It's about just learning how to paint, right? And you got the rest of your life to be a perfect painter, if you even believe that's possible. I don't think it's possible, but we can agree to disagree. So let's look at the cat, think about where we want to start. So if I'm painting this, I'll probably just go right in and start painting the face. But, I would suggest, especially if you're a beginner, maybe to try something else. Maybe, let's say, the legs, the tail. Work your way up to the face so you can build up some confidence as you go. And you're like, okay, I think I got this. I know what I need to do now. Now I can bring all that knowledge and experience, what little or you might have, towards painting the cat's face. So you just have a little bit more confidence when you tackle that area, because after all, that's where our eyes are conditioned to look, is at other eyes. So we might want that might probably going to be where 90% of people are going to look most quickly, is at those eyes. So that might be where you want to reserve your best brush strokes for, if you can. Right, that's easier said than done, right? So I'm going to use my glazing fluid here once again. I'm going to take some black. I'm going to maybe not go quite as heavy. Oops. So I took my black glazing fluid here. I'm going to mix these together. Maybe not going to go quite as heavy as I did with the pillow. I put a lot of black in there. It was probably like 30% black, 70% glazing fluid. This one is now maybe more like 90% glazing fluid, 10% black. Just so that, painting on top of white, really high contrast scenario, so I probably don't need as saturated of a color here. Now this is going to be drying pretty quickly. So if I did want to soften those edges with a soft brush, got to do that, within 10-20 seconds of applying that paint onto the surface. Otherwise it's going to start to kind of burn in that brush stroke on there. Now, if you're painting this at home, obviously you can take your time. You may even feel like after that leg, blow dry that and then move on. Versus, I'm kind of hustling here to get this done. So I'm just gonna plow forward and try to get as much as I can. You can also see that as I'm painting, it's this glaze is kind of lightening up a little bit, because the first few brush strokes I had a lot of black on there, and then that black starts to dissipate. I just added a bit more black onto my brush. So I'm pushing it a little bit in this area here. I should probably blow dry that. Okay, I'm gonna blow dry this. Okay. It's going to be a bit of a race to the finish here, so I'm going to be a little bit bolder. gonna add just a tiny bit of water on my blending brush. Okay, I gotta blow dry this, and I think I'm gonna start doing my outlines. I'm trying to book a car. Okay, what do I want to do? Let's go to, I'm going to take my black. I'm going to put a little bit of glazing fluid in here. So I'm going to take this black, it has glazing fluid in it, so I can use it to kind of soften out these edges. Glazing fluid also make it, of course it makes it more transparent, but it can also give it a bit more of a fluid quality that allows me to kind of, you know, might be easier for some people to paint. You might feel like, oh, it's a nice, just softer, smoother consistency of paint, less thick and goopy and gummy. Just kind of going over this edge and just blending it out just keeps it a little bit less kind of like as if I just went over it with a Sharpie. And let's do the face of the cat actually. Not particularly chatty, as I'm kind of like, I gotta get going. I'm gonna be late. Getting a haircut, and I should be in the barber's chair in 10 minutes. And I gotta get, it's gonna take me 10 minutes to get there, so. Oh, sorry, Steven, I'm gonna be a little bit late here. Now I'm just putting little, making the paws a little bit more obvious there on this back leg. Just kind of out of instinct, I suppose. Blow dry that. That's not behaving well. So like my blending brush, look how much paint is on there. Gonna dry that off. Okay, I'm going to give a quick blow dry, a couple of little quick things I want to do. Okay. Okay, I have no choice but to stop right here. That's okay. Maybe just a quick little blow dry. Gotta stop. Okay, maybe one last little thing, something I always like doing. Let's just get a bit of pure white. I'm just gonna take it right out of the tip of the jar here. I'm just gonna put a little bit of a highlight on these eyes. And maybe a bit on the nose there, just. I don't know about the nose. You tell me in the comments whether you think it's a good idea or not. Okay. Okay, so we've reached that part of the video where we're going to do our side-by-side comparison, see how these paintings turned out. Okay, just quickly before I do that, just want to encourage people to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you can join me for future episodes, especially these ones that might be taking place at unconventional times at the last minute like today. If you want to leave a small donation, $5 to help pay the light bills here and help me buy cameras when they eventually go out, you can use the link there for PayPal. It'll take you to this page where you can safely donate to support the channel. You can also send an e-transfer or a check in the mail or use the YouTube Super Chat while we're live. And also join the Facebook group so you could share the creation you've made today, whether it's a drawing or a painting, even the drawing or painting classes I did years and years and years ago. I still give people free feedback on that. And I think next week will be our next free bonus episode. Okay, so let's look at the original. I keep hoping I can get a car to go right here. Evo, but nothing's happening there. Okay. So, there's this painting side by side. You know, I wish I had a little bit more time to do a little bit more refinements on the cat. It looks a little, you know, not quite as much detail as the original. But I think, as again, my grandfather always used to say, good enough for government work. So maybe let's just take a quick zoom in. Let me just make sure that's in focus. You know, a little bit different. I did put those little white spots on the eyes. Helps give just a little reflection of light on the face there, which I think is really important. So let's zoom. Let's start on the bottom left. How about that? Okay. So once again, you can see that the colors are slightly different. We've got a little bit more orange in that red. I mentioned that earlier. The blues could be a little bit different. But again, I was really trying with this episode to go as quickly as possible and not fiddle or fuss over too much. So I think that's okay. I don't think it's anything that's going to cause anybody to not be, for the painting to fall apart, essentially, right? Again, I can notice very quickly, too, that the color of my cat just seems much more white than the original. As I look at the original, I'm like, wow, that's It's much more kind of grayish quality, you know. And this is a purple white. There's no actual, it's not pure white here. There's relatively, probably like 5% purple in that white. Again, you can really see the difference between this red and the original, although it's not quite as orange as this appears on camera. That does look, you know, again, if that's my red tube of paint, right, you can see that the color of the camera is changing that. So that's my red. So it's obviously, this is not orange, but it's red, and that's the way it looks. So, well, let's look at the top up here, those greens. Let's go to the yellow. Oops. Yeah, I feel good. Again, could be a little bit more modeling happening. I did that pretty quickly. Same thing with the top, the shoulder of the cat. You know, that could have been articulated a bit more, but no, I didn't. And down here with the bottom of the cushion, oops. I feel pretty happy with that. And then let's just kind of end with the cat itself. Maybe just the ears. Yeah, I think, you know, my dark lines are a little bit more bold, or kind of blended out a little bit more. To get that effect, I would just have to be way more patient than what I did. You know, I basically painted that whole cat in what, 15 minutes? So if I was to spend an hour doing this, I think I could have it a little bit more refined, a little bit more subtle kind of shades between those colors. But it is what it is. And I think for a couple of hours work of painting, not too shabby. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for painting along with me once again. For keeping me company and all the fun stuff in the chat. I really have to run, so I know there's some comments here. I won't get a chance to read them until later on. But thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day, and I can't wait to see what you've created. We'll see you again in the next episode. Remember to like, subscribe, so you know when those future episodes are taking place. Have a wonderful day, night, morning, wherever you are. Take care, my friends, and we'll see you again very soon.